Lucas, the charismatic and somewhat impulsive leader of the group, always in search of new adventures. Anna, a skeptic group who only participates for friendship but does not believe in paranormal phenomena. John, the most fearful but also the most curious, with a slight inclination to the occult. Mariana, a friend who brings a touch of humor and lightness, helping to keep the group together. Carlos, the horror story enthusiast, always interested in new experiences and challenges. The game takes place in an old and isolated house, borrowed by Carlos, who describes it as perfect for the environment. The house has an atmosphere of mystery, with antique furniture and walls that seem to whisper secrets. The group meets in the main room, where the environment is illuminated only by candles and lanterns, creating dancing shadows on the walls. There is a sense of anticipation and nervousness in the air. Lucas, with his enthusiasm, is the main motivator of the idea, encouraging the group to participate. He uses his charisma to convince others. Anna, although skeptical, accepts the challenge to prove that the game is a scam and to maintain the balance of the group. John, despite his fear, is excited by the idea and hopeful that the experience will be exciting. Mariana and Carlos bring a light tone to the situation, with jokes and relaxed comments, trying to ease the growing tension. The group starts to tidy up the room, placing candles around the space and creating a circle on the floor with symbols and hidden words according to the instructions of the game. The environment is carefully darkened to increase the effect. The tension increases as the house seems to fill with a strange energy, with inexplicable sounds that begin to emerge, like creaks and murmurs. An old and worn-out board with mystical symbols and instructions. The board is the central point of the game and seems to have a sinister past. A crystal or a small magic stone as a focus for the invocation. Paper and pen to write the rules and any magic words needed. The rules are read aloud by Lucas, who emphasizes the importance of following each step to ensure the safety and success of the ritual. Instructions include guidelines on how to call the entity, what to do if something goes wrong, and strict prohibitions on breaking any rules, which are designed to increase suspense and fear. The group is motivated by curiosity and a desire to challenge their own limits. Carlos, in particular, wants to test the veracity of the horror stories that he loves to tell. In addition, there is a desire to have fun and create a memorable experience. They see the game as a way to have an exciting and different night, away from the daily routine. There is a mixture of tension and hope in the air. The group is looking forward to what's coming, mixing fear and excitement with the prospect of an adrenaline-filled night. The group gathers around the board, each with a candle in hand, creating a circle of dim light and long shadows. The environment is charged with a palpable energy, and the climate of tension is almost visible. Lucas takes a last look at the instructions and places the crystal in the center of the board, while Anna observes with a skeptical gaze, but not without a hint of nervousness. Joao adjusts the candle so that the light illuminates the board in a disturbing way. Mariana tries to play a little to relieve the tension, but realizes that her friends are serious and focused. Luke begins to recite the words of invocation in a low and solemn voice, as indicated in the rules. The words are in an ancient language, which no one in the group understands completely. He tries to keep his voice steady, but there is a subtle tremor of excitement and nervousness. As Lucas speaks, the surrounding environment seems to begin to change. The air becomes heavier, and a feeling of cold begins to spread through the room. The candles tremble, and the shadows on the walls seem to move erratically. A light breeze travels through the room, even with the windows closed, causing the candles to flash and the shadows to shake. The group begins to feel a feeling of growing discomfort, as if they are being watched. The board seems to come alive, with symbols and words starting to glow weak and irregular. The participants feel a strange presence, as if something invisible is manifesting. Lucas, he is anxious and excited, believing that he is about to witness something incredible. He tries to keep control, but his excitement is evident. Anna, the skeptic, begins to feel uncomfortable. She tries to rationalize the events, but the strange atmosphere and unusual signs begin to make her belief be questioned. John, he is clearly nervous, with a pale face and trembling hands. His curiosity is mixed with a growing fear, which he tries to hide. Mariana, Despite the jokes and attempts to keep the atmosphere light, she begins to feel a chill in her spine. The heavy environment affects her more than she expected. Carlos. He is amazed by what he sees, finding the experience exciting. However, he cannot ignore a growing sense that something is not right. The air in the room seems to become denser, as if the energy around it is concentrating. Subtle sounds, such as distant whispers or gentle steps, begin to be heard, increasing the sense of suspense. The shadows on the walls seem to stretch and distort, giving the impression that strange figures are moving out of sight. The group feels a sense of constant vigilance, as if they are being observed by something invisible. A sudden noise, such as a distant bang or falling object, breaks the silence, causing a momentary panic among the group. They look at each other, trying to understand if the sound was real or an invention of their minds. The tray seems to vibrate slightly, and the crystal in the center begins to emit a faint glow. The sense of presence intensifies, and the group begins to wonder if they really invoked something. The group begins to discuss whether they should continue or stop the game. The decision to move forward or not is difficult, as everyone is starting to feel a growing fear. But there is also a determination to complete the game so as not to look like cowards. Discussions are interrupted by a feeling that something has changed in the environment, as if a new entity has been drawn into the room. The group, now divided between the will to continue and the growing fear, faces the critical decision of whether to proceed or abandon the ritual. Lucas decides to add a personal touch to the ritual, believing that a minor change in the rules will not affect the result. He uses a personal object, such as a photo or an amulet, which was not provided in the game instructions. Anna, skeptical and impatient, interrupts the ritual to make a joke about the situation, laughing nervously and disregarding the seriousness of the words recited. She provokes the entity, challenging it to manifest. John perceives a sudden change in the environment. He sees a shadow moving quickly through the corner of the room and starts to shake, but the others do not take him seriously at first. Mariana, trying to relieve the tension, tries to move out of the circle of candles to get something in the kitchen. She moves away from the group, inadvertently violating the rule of not leaving the circle during the ritual. As each rule is broken, the atmosphere in the room changes drastically. The candles suddenly go out, and a cold and intense wind begins to circulate through the room, hitting hard on the walls and creating a sound of mourning in the environment. The board starts to shake violently, and the symbols on its surface become brighter and distorted. The crystal in the center emits an intense, almost blinding glow before breaking into small pieces. A deep, guttural sound begins to fill the room, as if something invisible is approaching. Participants feel an oppressive presence and a growing sense of fear. The entity manifests itself in a subtle way at first, with movements in the darkness, whispers that seem to come from all sides, and an increasing pressure on the group. Luke sees a shadowy, indistinct figure in the corners of his peripheral vision. He tries to ignore, believing it is just his mind playing tricks, but the feeling that he is being watched becomes overwhelming. Anna begins to hear whispers in her head, unintelligible words that make her upset. She tries to rationalize the sounds, but the feeling of being called out of the room makes her question her sanity. John is visibly terrified and tries to hide, but the shadows seem to move behind him, creating grotesque and distorted figures that leave him paralyzed with fear. Mariana, now back in the circle, notices that the candle light is flickering frantically and that an invisible force seems to push her back into the center. The group tries to recite the words of invocation back, trying to restore order and reverse what they did, but the words come out in a cluttered and disordered way. The entity seems to be absorbing the energy of the attempt at correction, further intensifying the chaos. Carlos tries to use his knowledge of the occult to help, but his attempts to reverse the ritual only seem to aggravate the situation. He begins to realize that his own energy is being drained. Lucas tries to calm everyone, but his voice is muffled by the increasing sounds and strength of the entity. The fear begins to spread quickly, and friends start screaming and pushing each other, trying to find a way out. Anna, usually the most rational, panics and begins to ask desperate questions about what to do, unable to hear the answers or understand the confusing and distorted instructions that the entity seems to provide. The surrounding environment seems to deteriorate. The walls of the room begin to deform, and the floor seems to shake, as if the house is responding to the internal chaos. The entity makes the environment become increasingly hostile, with objects floating in the air, thunderstorms, and cracks in the walls that seem to pulse with an evil energy. The entity begins to manifest itself more clearly, with dark and distorted figures appearing and disappearing rapidly around the room. These figures seem to move with intent and observe the group with threatening looks. The walls of the room begin to cover with black and damp spots, as if the house itself was sweating a dark substance. The environment becomes increasingly cold, and the air seems to be filled with a heavy substance that makes breathing difficult. The shadows of the candles stretch and twist, forming grotesque shapes that seem to writhe and advance towards the members of the group. Sounds of scratching and beating come from places where there is no one. Objects in the room, such as furniture and utensils, begin to move on their own, being pushed or thrown with force. A chair may be swung violently, or a book may be thrown against the wall. The entity begins to attack the mind of friends. They hear disturbing whispers, see disturbing visions, and have intrusive and terrifying thoughts that threaten their sanity. The voices seem to know each other's deepest secrets and personal fears. Lucas, trying to keep control, Lucas tries to reverse the ritual with an improvised solution. However, their leadership is challenged by the growing sense of panic and lack of trust from others. He begins to wonder if he will be able to keep the group together. Anna, the skeptic, begins to have visions that challenge her rationality, like figures of loved ones in danger. Her fear makes her act impulsively and disorderly, which puts her in danger. Joao, the fear of Joao reaches extreme levels. He begins to disorient himself and has difficulty in distinguishing reality from illusion. He tries to hide, but the places where he takes refuge seem to be invaded by the entity. Mariana, trying to be an emotional support for the group, ends up becoming one of the main targets of the entity. She begins to have visions and panic attacks that leave her almost paralyzed. Carlos, with his knowledge of the occult, Carlos tries to help, but his attempts are frustrated. The entity seems to drain his energy and knowledge, and he begins to feel increasingly helpless and exhausted. The group tries to escape from the room or house, but finds locked doors, windows that do not open, and an environment that seems to change constantly. Escape attempts are frustrated by supernatural obstacles that seem to be created by the entity. Each attempt to leave only seems to aggravate the situation. The group faces elongated corridors, doors leading to places they don't know, and a growing sense of claustrophobia. The house seems to break down physically. The floor starts to crack and the walls start to crumble. The environment becomes increasingly chaotic, with spatial distortions and disjointed views. Time seems to stretch and compress erratically. Hours pass in minutes and vice versa, confusing the group's perception and increasing despair. The entity begins to reveal fragments of old and disturbing stories about the house and its former residents. These revelations are accompanied by terrifying visions of past events that show the suffering and violence that occurred on the spot. The entity uses the group's personal fears and secrets against them, revealing painful truths and creating an environment of mistrust and paranoia. Lucas, with the group in panic, Lucas tries to keep the lead, but his strength begins to fail. He sees himself struggling to maintain order while facing his own growing terror. Anna, the skeptic, now deeply terrified, questions her beliefs and begins to fight against despair. His behavior becomes erratic and unpredictable. Joao, the fear of Joao leads him to extreme attitudes, and he finds himself making impulsive decisions that end up aggravating the situation. His paranoia grows, making him a risk to the group. Mariana, the attempt to be the emotional anchor makes her overwhelmed. Her panic attacks make her an easy target for the entity, and her despair grows as the situation worsens. Carlos, your knowledge about the occult is not enough to face the entity. He begins to feel helpless and exhausted, and his energy seems to be drained by the entity. Lucas tries to regain control by reciting the words of the ritual again, with difficulty. He notices that the text on the board is changing and becoming increasingly incomprehensible. His attempts are interrupted by an invisible force that makes him stumble and drop candles. Anna, who was already in panic, tries to use her rational skills to find a logical solution. She desperately seeks any book or text that may contain an explanation or a way to reverse what they have done, but finds only more chaos and fear. Carlos tries to use his knowledge of rituals and occultism to improvise a counter-ritual. He tries to create a new circle of protection using objects found in the house, but the entity seems to oppose each attempt, making the task almost impossible. Mariana seeks to use personal items or objects of the house to create an improvised protection. She tries to use symbols or amulets she has found, but the entity continues to weaken her attempts. The group is physically and emotionally exhausted. Attempts to control seem fruitless and, as time passes, fatigue becomes palpable. Fear and despair are taking hold of everyone, and they begin to doubt the effectiveness of any plan. Lucas and Anna discuss fiercely about what to do. Lucas believes that they should continue trying the ritual, while Anna wants to find a way out of the house at all costs. The discussion creates a division in the group, increasing tension and fear. João and Mariana move away from the group to try to find a solution on their own. They encounter more manifestations of the entity and end up separating even more, intensifying the feeling of isolation. John begins to have visual and auditory hallucinations, seeing things that are not there and hearing voices that disturb him. He is so paralyzed by fear that he can barely react to the threats around him. Mariana, trying to be rational, is confronted with visions of loved ones in danger. His mind begins to crumble under pressure, and he starts to wonder if his own perceptions are reliable. Cracks in the walls become deep cracks, and the floor begins to crumble, creating dangerous holes and unevenness. The group has difficulty standing and moves carefully to avoid physical hazards. The natural lighting of the environment seems to disappear, and alternative light sources such as lanterns and candles fail intermittently, creating an almost total darkness. The group begins to notice that the space around them is twisting and distorting. Corridors stretch and shorten, doors lead to unknown places, and rooms seem to move and change position. The time seems not to follow a regular flow. The group experiences periods of calm followed by moments of frenetic chaos, unable to determine how long it has been or how much time remains until dawn. The entity reveals disturbing visions of the past of the house, showing events of violence, suffering, and deaths that occurred there. These visions are vivid and terrifying, making the group feel as if they were experiencing these events in real time. The group discovers that the house has been the scene of rituals and sinister events in the past, and the entity seems to be feeding on these old energies to strengthen itself. The entity uses the group's deepest secrets and fears against them. It makes each member face their own anxieties and traumas, exposing their weaknesses and using them to manipulate and terrorize even more. The group begins to distrust each other, with personal revelations creating tension and division. Paranoia spreads, and friends see themselves fighting not only against the entity but also against growing mistrust and fear of each other. Lucas and Anna, despite their disagreements, try to work together in a last attempt to solve the situation. They combine their remaining knowledge and skills to try a final plan of resistance or escape. Carlos, Mariana, and João face their own challenges, trying to survive the chaos and protect each other while the entity continues to attack. Their strength and hopes are running out, but they still struggle to find a way out. The group realizes that the dawn is approaching and that the only chance of survival is to resist until then. They try to get together and create a final plan to ensure that the entity does not devour them before the night is over. The tension reaches its climax as they face the last onslaught of the entity and struggle to maintain hope and sanity while anxiously waiting for dawn. The group finds an old clock or device they use to try to monitor the passage of time. They become obsessed with time, counting every minute that passes with hope and growing despair. They mark the remaining time on a wall or paper, creating a sense of urgency. Every advance in the clock is celebrated with temporary relief, but the fear that something can go wrong at any moment is constant. Based on the information about the entity and what they have learned about the environment, the group tries to create a safe space inside the house. They use found objects, such as salt, protective symbols, or personal items, to form a line of defense. Use furniture and objects to barricade doors and windows, trying to create a safe space where they can shelter until dawn. The idea is to minimize the risk that the entity can enter your protection space. They develop an emergency plan, with each member assigned to a specific task. For example, one member may be responsible for keeping the candles lit, another for monitoring safety, and others for preparing basic supplies. Establish a communication system using a whistle, hand signal, or other method to alert each other of any threat or change in the environment. The entity intensifies its attacks as it approaches dawn. She tries to break through the barriers and comes into contact with the group through physical manifestations, such as thrown objects or invisible forces that try to pull them out of the safe area. The entity uses the fears and personal traumas of group members to attack them psychologically, creating hallucinations and visions that disorient and weaken them mentally. The group faces internal crises, with members beginning to misunderstand each other, discredit each other, or even try to escape alone. Confidence is waning and panic can lead to desperate and dangerous decisions. At a critical moment, one may have to make a sacrifice to ensure the survival of others. This may involve a difficult decision, such as luring the entity away or confronting the entity directly to allow others to escape. As the light of dawn begins to infiltrate the house, the entity seems to weaken. The attacks become less frequent and the oppressive atmosphere begins to subside. The group sees clear signs that the entity is retreating, such as the dissipation of shadows and the gradual return to normality in the environment. They feel relieved, but exhausted and traumatized. The entity finally retreats or disappears, with the light of dawn seemingly banishing its presence. The group is free of the threat, but with emotional and physical scars. The survivors try to regroup and help each other. They discuss what happened and try to understand what was real and what was caused by fear and tension. There is a sense of relief mixed with deep reflection on the experience. The group begins to assess the damage to the home and their own physical and emotional states. They face the reality of the consequences of what happened and the impact it had on their lives. The group reflects on their experience and what they have learned. They discuss the importance of respecting forces that do not understand and the need to face personal fears and challenges together. Each member of the group is affected differently by experience. Some may move away, others may approach, and all have to deal with the internal changes that experience has caused. The story may end with a final scene showing the group trying to get back to normal, but with a feeling that what happened will never be completely forgotten. The entity may have left a permanent mark, symbolizing the lasting impact of the experience. As the light of dawn begins to penetrate the house, the group observes a gradual change in the environment. The darkness that once dominated the place begins to recede, and the intense cold diminishes, giving way to a feeling of lightness. The shadows that once moved in a threatening way begin to dissipate. The sound of entity manifestations, like scratches and whispers, decreases until it becomes almost inaudible. The group notices that the oppressive atmosphere is crumbling, and the house seems to be starting to return to normal. As the light of dawn increases, the entity seems to lose its strength. Attacks become more spaced and less intense. The group notes that objects that once moved on their own are now at rest and cracks in the walls begin to close slowly. The entity, manifesting itself one last time, emits a dying cry that resonates through the house before disappearing completely. The group sees sunlight through the windows, confirming that the threat has been banished. The group meets, exhausted and traumatized. The tension between the members begins to diminish, but the experience has left deep marks on everyone. They embrace and try to comfort themselves, recognizing that they have survived a terrible night. Luke stands out as the leader, consoling others and taking responsibility for what happened. Anna, still in shock, expresses her gratitude for surviving but also reveals her persistent fear. John, who was very disturbed, receives support from friends to calm down and reorient himself. Mariana and Carlos try to process the experience, with Mariana showing signs of trauma and Carlos reflecting on the knowledge that was insufficient to deal with the entity. The group examines the damage to the house and finds that the physical environment has suffered severe damage. Furniture is broken, walls are cracked, and the environment is in a state of disorder. However, the house is still standing, and they begin to clean up and repair the damage. They also find evidence of the entity's manifestations, such as strange marks on walls and objects in unexpected places. These are visible memories of the terrifying night. Each member of the group begins to reflect on what happened and how it affected them. They share their experiences and feelings, addressing their own weaknesses and fears that have been exposed by the entity. Lucas and Anna work to restore trust and friendship in the group, while João, Mariana, and Carlos seek professional help to deal with psychological trauma. The experience left them with deep emotional scars, but also a new understanding of the strength of friendship and the importance of facing challenges together. The group learns a valuable lesson about respecting forces they do not understand. They recognize the importance of being cautious about the unknown and the need to face their own fears with courage and mutual support. Lucas and Anna eventually decide that the experience should serve as a warning to others about the dangers of playing with forces beyond human comprehension. The story may end with a scene in which the house, now repaired and seemingly normal, is shown from an external perspective. The sun shines on the house, symbolizing the restoration of order and the end of the threat. However, a final detail may suggest that the experience was not completely forgotten. It can be a brief scene showing a shadow or a subtle whisper, indicating that the presence of the entity may still have left a residual mark, leaving a feeling of unease at the end of the story.